So we had a very insightful super fan make a brilliant suggestion that we are acting on starting with this very episode. David Gaines, who's the author of Radical Business, the CEO of Terza Coffee, and just generally overall kind human being, sent in a message cheering us on for our podcast rebrand and then pushed us to do just a bit more. Specifically, he said, the guests you have on clearly have their brilliance to add to the world, but for me personally, the main reason I listen to your work is that I find a lot of brilliance in your perspectives as you process in real time what your guests are saying. Amazing.
Talk about a nice message to get, right? And considering that, while you and I we're both deeply curious human beings who are pretty darn good at interviewing people, we also are speakers who very much have our own brilliant perspectives. His words, not ours, also. So thank you, David. We're going to start weaving in more episodes with our thoughts and our reflections and our actions based on what we learn from our guests going forward.
In addition, super exciting because this fall we're working on something new for our newsletter subscribers. So make sure that you are subscribed to be the first to hear about it, because who doesn't want to be the first, right? And if you're more of an audiophile, based on the fact that, I don't know, you're listening to this podcast, let's say, take a moment to check our show notes for a link to leave an audio recording of your feedback on how we can make this podcast the best that it can be for you.
You're listening to the podcast, What Do You Mean by That? And we are your co-hosts, Sarah and me, Sasha. So, shall we take this opportunity to reflect on our incredible summer series on how to be a better human? Like things like what stood out to you the most, what surprised you? Is there anything you might, I don't know, disagree with or push back on? And I guess more importantly, is there anything practical you're walking away with to implement in your actual life?
You know, I'm here for this conversation and I love all of those questions. And I want to take us back, even like zoom out a little bit further, because what if we were to pull back like our podcast curtain a little bit and talk about how we even came up with a summer series? Like, where does the idea come from? And I think this is like an often asked listener question. How do we find our guests? So, Sarah, you want to kick us off with like a little bit about how this summer series came to being, into being rather?
You're sort of assuming that my short-term memory still exists. And I actually am
I
like,
have faith in you, Sarah. You got
how
this.
did we? I feel like, you know what? It was partly to do with the rebranding. For a very long time, and rightfully so, our old podcast, Dear White Women, was very much rooted in racial bias and social justice and in discussing why we are as a country where we are today. And I feel like after 6 years of having that show, we both had pretty good grounding in that topic. There's obviously forever more topics that we can discuss. But I think the more we learned that like a lot of these forces are interwoven. Right? Like we're talking neurodiversity, ageism, like it's not like while racism, I think, is the base of some of the stuff that goes around in our community. I feel like I was learning more about positive psychology and human well-being and just curious about what are the things we can do to make the world better for all of us now that we have a grounded understanding in why we are where we are as a country. And so with this rebranding felt like this opportunity to really explore how can we do things that are good for us? How do we learn more about these things that are good for us and for society? And who are the experts out there who can help us learn? So that was what I remember. I don't know. What do you remember about that? What do you want to share?
I think that's right. And I also think because we do a lot of talking for a living, and you and I both facilitate in separate spaces, and I do a lot of work with children and thinking about how questions come up, how dialogue comes up, how do we talk or not talk to each other, and then sort of the increasing way in which we as a country are unable to talk to each other. I think that was also part of the grounding of this series is if I had to pick like one through line, it would be kind of how are we able to relate to each other? Like, what are the tools that we need to be able to continue to talk to each other? And so I think that building off of those 6 years and also really thinking about what does the rest of 2025 look like? What does I don't know, forever look like? How can we talk to each other? Because otherwise we are just going to be increasingly divided, right? So that was, I feel like also one of our real tenets for this.
Yeah. And I think in terms of guests, I mean, we've been really, really lucky. Like the number of inbound requests we get from authors, publicists, like incredible thought leaders about, hey, can I come and share my thoughts with you on your show? Like, wow, how do we get this caliber of people?
Right?
It's incredible. And I think because we've done it for so long, we've just put one foot in front of the other week after week, month after month. We have done this show and we've built up enough credibility that when we reach out and ask people, they are very likely to say yes. And so we've been really lucky that people are willing to trust us and share their time with us. Time is such a precious resource. And then they've given that to us so that we can share it with all of you, our listeners. And I just feel really lucky.
And I feel like we really hit on the right guests this summer to talk about these topics, right? Because I think there are many ways that you could have approached each of the topics that we addressed. And I feel so lucky that we were able to, get these people on our podcast, get their ideas out, and really make it practical, right? Because I think that's always something where, that is the hill we're going to die on, practical ways to do things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I
Yeah.
think that practicality started with why we even did our book in the first place, Dear White Women, because I think until that point, so many books on race and racism have been talking about ideals and
Mm,
lofty like thoughts, but there wasn't at the time our book was published. I think we were one of the first books to talk about practical things you can do differently in your real
yep.
life that isn't like, let's save the world with this action, you know? So I love that. I think practicality will be our hallmark forever. And so along those lines, and what did you, let's start. Let's go with the
Okay, let's do it.
unbelievable summer episodes. Episode 2, How to Be a Radical Listener with Dr. Robert B. Swastiner and Christian Van Nieuwenburg. Like, here, you go first. Let me ask you, what did you take from that?
I think going back to what we were just talking about, like, well, let me back up. How to be like even a good listener, not even a radical listener, has been something I don't think I've had radical yet. Like, I feel like that is like a pedestal. I don't know. I may never get there. Who knows? But like, how to be a good listener has been something that I personally spent a lot of time working on, and I have thought about in many different spheres of life. Right. So I was really excited to have this conversation because I was like, okay, what are the steps and what are the practical things that we can think about and do? And I think like for me, the biggest takeaway, which was kind of validating, was that we can acknowledge that people have different opinions without that reflecting away about it. Does not mean that we are agreeing with their different opinions. And because, like I mentioned, right, each of these episodes, I was personally looking for takeaways to be like, how do I keep talking to people in my life, in my spheres of, influence, in my community when I disagree with them, right? And so that one in particular kind of hit home for me, the concept that people have different opinions. Everyone's entitled to their different opinions. That does not mean that you agree with them if you engage with them, right? So that was what I walked away with.
I really love that part of it too. I feel like I sat with that all summer. I love hearing you talk about this too, in particular, because you didn't say it just now, but one of the things we've often talked about is you are a trained lawyer and your whole lived professional experience during those lawyer days was listening. So you knew how to like fight back, like you
Yeah.
listened to rebut and you untrained yourself from that so that you could listen to understand. And I love that, so I've always thought that about how you discuss the power of listening. And for me, then having been faced, within the summer, talking to people close to me who have very different political opinions, like I felt it in my body. I was like shallow of breath and my heart was starting to race. And I remembered that whole thing of like, you have to honor the right of other people to have different opinions than you, because if you don't respect that, then you're not going to listen, and then the rift will continue because then they will feel the same about you, and then there's no relationship. And so if you care about the relationships, you have to start with this mutual respect that like everyone's entitled to their opinion. You may totally disagree with it, but you have to start from that place of respect in order for things to move forward. And that can be really challenging, but it helps ground us back in that humanity and being like, this really matters to me. This is why it's so hard for me to have these conversations. It must be hard for them too. Anything else there? Can I ask you about the next episode?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you tied that into, I think we talk about this a lot in like corporate settings or in, different settings, but it's what you talked about is a great reminder that this is really personal too, right? Like we have these conversations in our personal lives. And also, I'm not leading with I'm a lawyer these days because everyone's like, yeah, JD Vance is a lawyer. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So, yeah, we've got terrible lawyers out there. Cool. So, yes, thank you. Thank you for pointing out I'd like to stay on the side of good lawyers. Just saying. So,
All right. Well, you can be the good lawyer that I know, and we'll just continue to add to our collection of good people. So, folks, throw your hat in the ring if you want to be added to the good lawyer list.
I'm looking for more good lawyers, people.
I love it. Well, so this next, and there was a lot more to learn from that episode, and I loved the hand doodles. I did learn about an app called Notability where you can hand draw graphics that you can include in books. And I have actually got an iPad for this purpose, like a secondhand one,
I
because,
can't wait for these. I'm just saying.
oh, just you wait.
I can't
Um,
wait. Seriously.
Maybe this will inspire me to actually do something with our social media feed. But anyway, I've said that for 6 years. Episode 3 was being kinder, how to be kinder, not nicer, with Dr. Kelly Harding, who I have a soft spot for. She and I are actually co-writing a book. It is due out fall of 2026 called Different, on raising teens who are different in some way. So really appreciated that she also spent time. She's also like a medical doctor who's focused on the power of kindness to our health, which is mind blowing and I think incredibly powerful. So you asked a really good question during this episode. So I'm hoping you'll talk about what you took from it. Otherwise, I will.
Yeah, now, well, I think you're going to talk about nice white women, right? Are we talking about this one? Because I have to admit, like I have a real, I feel a way about niceness, right? Especially when it comes to nice white women and how nice white women have gotten a lot of black and brown people killed. And nice white women maybe elected Donald Trump. Like like I keep thinking about
Like, let's
I'm
just.
serious. Like, statistics don't lie, actually. But, I was really, I don't know what the right word is, but I was so excited to have this conversation with Kelly on this front because A, that she was open to it, right? Because that is a non-starter for people, a lot of people these days. But B, that she was really willing to engage thoughtfully. And I think that, talking about the difference between niceness and kindness and how kindness doesn't appear in the same way, right? And I think that's really powerful because I think as children, right, you learn it's kind of interchangeable. And in fact, it's absolutely not. And how we're seeing it performed now in society, like niceness gets us trad wives, niceness gets us, women who are willing to be silent or worse in the face of incredible injustice. So that was the one question I think I wrote for this episode. And that was the one that I was like, let me ask it. And so she was so great. That part is something that stood out for me. But well, A, was that what you were going to talk about? And B, what stood out for you? Because I know you know Kelly well. And so
I was psyched for that particular segment of that episode for sure. And I think one thing I always remember then is kindness takes some level of bravery. Like being kind is even the smallest thing. Like if you're the type of person where you're out to dinner and your friend has spinach stuck in their teeth, are you going to tell them or are you not? And if you're not, you're avoiding a difficult, weird, uncomfortable situation. But if you're kind, you're going to let them know so they don't have a piece of spinach stuck in their teeth for the rest of the night, right? That kind of bravery to just use your voice a little bit, break the status quo, change things up, but like do something for the greater good is an incredibly powerful character trait. And so knowing that like, hey, I did something brave, like you can give yourself a pat on the back for being kind. And I think that that's important to differentiate and keep in mind. And I really love that episode for it.
I love that. I think that's so powerful. And that's something we should be teaching our kids too, right? That there is bravery, acts of kindness in that way. All right. Anything else, or should we move on
We can
to
move on.
episode 4? So I want to preface this by saying that it's not often on the podcast that we have repeat guests. And when we have repeat guests, it's because we really like those guests. And so, like, to have Colin Seal back on the podcast with how to improve your critical thinking skills, I think when we were thinking of the summer series, we were immediately like, yeah, we need this episode. And not only do we need this episode, we need this person to come back and talk about it. So, it was one of my favorites from the summer. But Sarah, I want to hear what stood out to you. What was your like big takeaway or thoughts around this?
Well, one is he's definitely should be added to the good lawyer list, your short list that you're compiling, because he is a great
100%.
lawyer and teacher, like not often a combination you see. And I think aside from also the alligator story that he shared, which was actually wonderfully engaging and poignant and worth listening to. I think one of the biggest things I took from this was that A, it's easy for us to all fall into this trap of thinking that we know better than other people and we've applied the thinking and they're all dumb. But he made a really good point that if you're doing what I just did and saying they and that they're all this, you have not engaged your critical thinking skills. You cannot articulate the other, air quote, other side's position. If you can't explain why someone would feel the way that they do, and if you're lumping them all together with words like they or that side or whatever, you're not doing the work yourself. So check yourself before you start going, into outrage mode, because I think it's very easy for any side of this political divide to say, well, it's the other side's problem. We have to do the work ourselves to look at the bigger picture, because ultimately, like you said from the start, if we're a country divided, we are not a country at all. And we have to come together. Each of us has a responsibility. That was the other thing he said. Like, nobody's coming to save us. We each have a responsibility to do our part, because that is the only thing that's going to save us.
I love that. I think a lot also about that same part about being able to articulate the other side's position, because I feel like it's very easy to live in an echo chamber, right? Especially if you're active at all on social media, right? It is real easy to find, especially the algorithm is going to feed you that echo chamber. And so that is possibly the hardest part of critical thinking skills, right? Like not to convince yourself that you're right, especially as it's rooted in some part of your identity, right? But to be able to at least articulate the other side. There's a real power in that. So, and also the way he talks about it is so engaging. Like I could listen to him,
Unbelievable.
obviously, we could listen to him
Yes.
talk for hours. So, as far as educators go, that quality is what you need. So I hope to see him far and wide too
Oh,
for,
totally. He also made the point that, like, it doesn't matter how advanced your critical thinking skills are. If you're a jerk, nobody's
yeah,
going to listen to you. That is a philosophy
so true.
you and I can get behind. And all of our work, like outside of this show, I think you and I have consistently led with heart first. We are not trying to put people on the defensive. Like, nothing is going to change if you put people on the defensive. That is our philosophy. And that, the way that Colin talked about it really resonated with me as well for that reason.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree.
Okay. Well, then moving on to Nerd Sarah just loved episode 5, talking about data, how to build trust to avoid the politics of division. In hindsight, it's like we built this whole thread for the summer series that led right into where we're going, right? Funny
Yeah, I
how
feel
that
like it
works.
looks more orchestrated than it actually was.
Right. We had Jan Emmanuel Deneuve, who is an Oxford professor, an economist, one of the lead editors of the World Happiness Report that ranks the US, that shows the US fell from like 12th to 24th place since, the decade plus since it started. So, what did you think of that episode?
Well, I mean, I was fully willing to be like a fly on the wall for that episode because I feel like you two would be like, World Happiness Report, let's talk about it, which you did, which I was really thankful for too, because I think it gets a little bit of coverage in the US but it kind of gets glossed over, like thrown in as a term and really unpacked is something that doesn't really happen, right? So I was really happy that we were able to do that. And he's just so patient and thoughtful and like the person that I wish I could be, except I'm not as patient or as thoughtful. So like that really came out while I was sitting there mostly like, wow, like he's got to be a great like academic educator as well too, and just the way he is. But and I know this resonated with our listeners too. The practical thing that stuck with me that I still think about is those 13 meals, right? Like I think about that because I'm like watching my kids and like, how many meals have you had this week with other people? Like I love that because it's really practical, and I love that because it also makes you think about how do we engage with others, and and how does that show up in our daily lives, right? On a very granular level. What about you? What stood
Yes.
out?
Well, I definitely loved the meals thing because it made me continue. You and I've talked forever about like gifts to my future self that I lob into the calendar for my sanity. And it really like regrounded for this next school year, this idea that I am going to continue to lob in gifts to my future self in the form of, whether it's a dinner party or a coffee or a lunch. Like, I want to have more meals with people because that is a prime opportunity for us to connect. And as we know, the lack of connection is really bad for our mental and physical health, as it turns out. So I think that is one. The other point that I actually referred to in my brain the other day was this idea that, like, I know this study was about, or the analysis was about strangers and how much trust we place in strangers and their willingness to return a wallet that you lose. But the fact that by a factor of two, we underestimate how much we could trust other people to do the right thing made me kind of go, huh, like maybe I am super highly skeptical of humanity. And maybe if even if there's people in my periphery who I know that aren't strangers, maybe it's okay for me to give them the benefit of the doubt a little bit more than I might otherwise, because we tend to, as humans across the board, underestimate that. And the last thing that I really took deeply from that was the conversation on like less happy people. This was like the crux of all of our work coming together, this data point, but like less happy people tend to be attracted to the extremes of the political system. They tend to reject the status quo, reject incumbents. And so, like, I have worked in positive psychology and lived by some of the studies and for decades, like before my children were born, like this was a field that I was interested in. And I have raised them to know the studies. And so now it makes sense that it helps us as a country to help make our people more happy because then they're not going to be as extreme and polarized. And then the fact that trust determined, it tended to show which polar pole people went to, that if you trusted strangers more, you tended to be more far left. If you trusted strangers less, you tended to be more far right. And I'm like, wow, how is there such a strong correlation between our personal tendencies, our happiness, and our trust, and how we show up at the voting booth? And so all of that then grounded my desire to be a better human by listening more, by understanding other people's, opinions, being kinder, all of these things that we've been talking about on the podcast up until that point. So I loved that episode as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful point too, because you think about the impact that one person can have, right? Or, in your life, right? In terms of being that trustworthy person for others. When people are like, I don't know what I can do. It's, I feel overwhelmed, which is fair and valid. But like to think about the role that each of us play, I think was a really powerful thing to come out of that as well. And like you said, it's like we just planned this arc because then we moved on to episode 6, which was, something we've been personally discussing. I don't know, obviously since November of 2024, but for a long time, right? How to be a better Democrat. And we had Megan Imperial on there, who has been sort of inside the DNC for a while in California. What stood out? Like, did we get our questions answered? How did that feel? How did that episode feel?
I want to be clear, I'm actually registered independent because I rejected this idea a long time ago of voting down party lines. That said, I'm very aware of the fact that I really want a strong Democratic Party to counteract what has become of the Republicans, and what is happening to our country right now. I wasn't as satisfied with not with Megan. Megan was great, but I'm not as satisfied with what the Democrats are doing or showing up as. I am really sick of getting, asks for $5 donations. And I'm like, that's not the answer here, folks. Like, I love what certain bolder politicians are doing right now to stand up. But what I really took from that conversation was this idea of the importance of getting involved on a local level. Like, I really, her focus on the California young Democrats, like you really realize how granular and we need to get with the data, with the community building in order to make a difference. And so I felt inspired to connect more locally with political organizations I live in Denver, so, and learn more about what's going on here. How about you?
Well, I share your frustration. I am a registered Democrat. I've been a Democrat for, I don't know, forever. I think is a foregone conclusion that just we're a family of Democrats. But, what was really striking to me is how much money it takes to run a campaign. And I think that when you think about how much money and time goes into fundraising, right? Like fundraising is such a crucial part of a campaign, but then it makes me ask the question like, well, how are you able to connect with your constituents if you need to be out there raising $1 million? And who can raise $1 million? I mean, I went down kind of this spiral afterwards being like, well, who then can legitimately run? And I think this is sort of combined with the lack of trust in our political leaders and who actually is like, you know what, I want that job. And then also has the ability and has the network or has the ability, the resources to tap into another network that can get you the money. So to me, that was like a really sobering part of this, in that I was like, no wonder we don't see regime change, right? Because it is so prohibitively hard. But then the part of me that like is thinking about how do we move forward is like, okay, well, how do we change the system then? How do we get different voices in there? And we can see it in different places, but I think there has to be a large scale focus on like, if we really want to change this, we have to change this part of it. Cause like, that part of that discussion was the super PACs, right? The Republicans have, we don't have the Koch brothers like out here funding candidates in a way. So like, how do we get new people in who can actually speak for the communities they represent? That's the
Right.
thing that I keep thinking about.
And my question has always been, so do you need to then funnel all these $5 things into the system to get the candidates
Mm,
elected so they can break it from the inside, or is there a way to do it from the outside? And that's
yeah.
that's that frustrating part of the whole system. So
Well, so after that, obviously, we needed episode 7, how to rest without feeling guilty. Like, what was your takeaway from that?
oh my gosh, I loved that episode. That was like the right
The
before
episode we
kids get
needed.
back to school. It was
Yeah.
exactly what we needed. I, for a long time, struggled with the idea of resting. I have, for the longest time, felt like, yes, I have had the privilege of taking it easy, but I almost had to make life harder for myself mentally by like being busy all the time and playing into it. And my body, as I age into my late 40s, is just like, I was going to swear, but I shouldn't do that. Like, it's like, no, you need to slow down. Your body cannot do the same level of stress it always has. And to be able to find context for why it is resistance to rest, that it is what makes it sustainable. It was incredibly life giving to be like, there is a way to continue holding firm and doing the work while living a sustainably paced life without exhausting yourself and burning yourself out, which is what capitalism wants you to do. So I could throw big words around, but ultimately I felt really good about the resources we pulled in from that episode. I love talking to you about it. I have had to live that life for the last year and a half, and it's just felt really good to be able to talk about it.
I love that. It's both of us are Asian eldest daughters. Like rest is a real tricky concept, which I think we talked about in the episode. I haven't even told you this yet, Sarah, but one of our other listeners, also named David, and I promise we have other listeners out there who are not named David, although our sample set looks real skewed right now, said that his favorite part about our rest episode was how we talked about resting through like advocacy in other ways, and like how that gave him tools to think about rest in a different way. And I was like, that's great, because I think that's also really powerful, right? Like rest doesn't mean the same thing to everyone, and resting also allows for space to do other stuff as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
like I mean, because we basically made the point that rest doesn't have to mean a break from your day-to-day life. Rest can be a totally different concept, and if you do it that way, as something that gives you joy,
Mhm.
all of a sudden it's like, oh, hang on, I can do that. Like it's just more attainable, And
Yeah.
it's something that I think all humans need in order to keep going. And you can find that in like 5 minute microbursts of like watching a sunrise or a sunset or slowing down to watch a bee pollinate the freaking garden. I don't know, like just random thoughts.
It's like
But
those are very specific. No, but I
yes,
love it. I love it. And it doesn't have to be hours uninterrupted, right? Because realistically, that's very hard to find in a day. But those micro moments can be enough.
totally. Well, I have loved talking through some of this stuff. I feel like I leveled up as a human this summer, listening to all these folks, learning these things, and actually incorporating a lot of them into my day to day. I mean, I truly, even when we talk about rest, I have enjoyed a garden. I'm now that lady who gardens. And I actually had my husband take a photo of me gardening just so I could be like, this is where my midlife is taking me, folks. Like, I.
Please send photo. I'm not sure I've received that in our text thread.
No, but I really feel like I have made changes and I have learned so much from this summer. And to be able to unpack that with you has been really fun. So I hope you have too.
I mean, it was sometimes I feel like we record the episodes that we feel that other people need to hear, and sometimes we record the episodes that we need to hear. And I feel like this summer was a lot of the latter. And for me, it was really great reminders, especially when it feels like the world is on fire, right, around you, to hold on to those things that can be needle moving, that are not necessarily hugely out there and performative, but are smaller interchanges so you can be ready to do the bigger work. So that was what I took away. And it's been so fun to discuss this with you and also do our like little postmortem of the summer, because now it is September and it is no longer summer. Womp womp. But
Indeed, indeed. Well, I mean, we just talked about making episodes for other people and making episodes for ourselves. If you want to have input on what you want to hear and what you think that we should be focusing on as we go forward for this next school year between September of 2025 and the summer of 2026, please weigh in. Look at the show notes for a survey, or and you may, if you want to just do it, get on our email list. We will send you out a survey that is due ideally in the next week. So if you listen to this live, you're in luck. And as always, let us know if you have any thoughts. We'd love your feedback, even if it's not via a survey. You've been listening to What Do You Mean by That? A show dedicated to being better humans and getting loud for all of us. Hat tip to Sarah's daughter for the logo, and huge thanks to Misasha's son for our incredible theme music. Find out more and subscribe to our newsletter at whatdoyoumeanbythat.com. Because as always, it's all of us or it's none of us.